Hamas terrorists tightened their grip in Gaza today after carrying out public executions. And just a heads up, the following footage may be disturbing to some viewers. The terrorists executed men they accused of collaborating with Israeli forces. Gaza residents said the terrorists were increasingly visible today, deploying along routes needed for aid deliveries. Palestinian security sources say dozens of people have been killed in clashes between Hamas and rivals in recent days. And Israel's military says it has identified the bodies of 4 deceased hostages. That includes Nepali national Bipin Joshi and Israeli citizen Guy Eluz, who was taken from the Nova Music Festival. 2 others remain unnamed at their family's request. The army says Hamas is still holding the bodies of 24 hostages. Former President Biden has praised President Trump for his role in brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. In a statement on X yesterday, Biden commended Trump and his team for their work to get a ceasefire deal over the finish line. Biden also highlighted his administration's efforts to bring hostages home and provide aid to Palestinian civilians. He said the Israeli hostages went through unimaginable hell and said civilians in Gaza will finally get a chance to rebuild their lives. Biden said with U.S. backing, the Middle East is on a path to peace. He expressed hope for a future for Israelis and Palestinians alike, with equal measures of peace, dignity, and safety. House Speaker Mike Johnson celebrating the Gaza peace deal. He said he is going to support President Trump's nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize.
I'm proud to tell you that together with my friend Speaker Ohana of the Israeli Knesset, the equivalent of our Congress, we're going to embark upon a project together to rally speakers and presidents of parliaments around the world so that we will jointly nominate President Donald J. Trump for next year's Nobel Peace Prize.
Johnson calls the signing of the Gaza peace deal a historic moment that deserves enormous credit and recognition on the world stage. He said no one has ever deserved that prize more than Trump. The House Speaker added that no president has undertaken the work of saving lives and pursuing peace with such determination and such success. The Prime Minister of Pakistan yesterday said he will nominate Trump again for the Nobel Peace Prize next year. Nominations for 2026 are accepted until January 31st. The Nobel Committee is expected to announce the winner roughly a year from now. Joining us to discuss is Carla Sands. She is the chair of the America First Policy Institute's Foreign Policy Initiative and former U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark. So first of all, good afternoon to you, Ambassador. Can you just speak to the significance here of President Trump being able to get the release of all hostages, all living hostages from Hamas? Can we start there?
Absolutely. President Trump has led boldly, bargained hard, and delivered results. The fact that no one else in the world could have freed these hostages taken over 700 days ago. And yesterday, the whole world, with few exceptions, rejoiced in the release of these hostages that have been abused, tortured, in some cases chained in one place for almost their entire captivity, taken by the terrorists Hamas. And what he is doing with his 20-point plan, and really the consensus of almost every powerful nation in the world aligned with him, is revolutionary to bring peace to the Gaza region.
Can you go into a little bit more detail here, Ambassador, about the approach that President Trump is employing here, his diplomatic strategies? How is it working, and what has led that strategy to bring Israel and Hamas towards peace?
Well, President Trump, as you will recall, wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. And he is a deal maker. He has brought deal makers in, like Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And what they do is they look for results. They don't look for process. American, and I will say most of the world's diplomats, they're about the process and not about the outcomes. President Trump is willing to force change. And by forcing the change, by moving quickly and forcing the change, he requires everyone around him to renegotiate, to take new positions. And so he has been able to break through, working with partners like the Qataris and the Turks to bring Hamas not just to the table, but to agreeing to the 20-point plan. And they have the first several points of the 20-point plan already achieved. And now it's up to the next step is Hamas lay down their arms and ask for amnesty or get safe passage out of Gaza. They will not tolerate images like you just showed with Hamas literally killing people in the streets because either they're from the wrong clan or they're suspected of having worked with the Israelis.
And on the topic of diplomacy, can you also talk about the importance of the personal diplomacy here and the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have a wonderful working relationship, but I do think that Netanyahu made some maybe miscalculations in his prosecution of this war. And so you can see that the results are that the Palestinians will have their state and it will be enforced and controlled, governed, if you will, by President Trump and people like Tony Blair. And it will be members of the Arab states, members from European states, but there will be order in Gaza and there will be development. And a lot of those Arab states, some of them that are part of the Abraham Accords, are going to help to finance and redevelop Gaza so that it's wonderful for the citizens. And that means infrastructure, bakeries, hospitals, all the things that people need to have their daily wonderful life.
And Ambassador, I think we can't forget Trump's team, right? Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Can you just comment on the Trump administration as well in achieving this initial peace agreement?
Don, I'm happy to. I'm thrilled to, actually. President Trump literally said he thinks that Secretary of State Marco Rubio will go down in history as the greatest Secretary of State in the history of our country. Well, that's extraordinary and so exciting. And I think it may be true because he's wearing so many hats. He's also the head of the NSC, acting as NSA, and he's running several other organizations besides the State Department, which in itself are tens of thousands of people around the world. It's already a huge beast to sort of get your arms around and have it do, create coalitions to have them fulfill the President Trump's his, I will say, his doctrine, his initiatives. And then we can see Jared Kushner has been involved with the region since the first Trump administration, done a wonderful job helping to create the Abraham Accords. The countries that first joined the Abraham Accords, like UAE, Sudan, Morocco, there are others. Now we see new countries that are planning to join. I believe Indonesia has spoken about joining. So this is what's happening is with President Trump bringing peace to the Middle East, at least the beginning of peace, the idea of peace, which is also revolutionary in itself. This is going to allow the Abraham Accords, or as President Trump has been saying, the Avraham Accords, to grow and expand, and that will bring prosperity and stability to the region. So it's a wonderful thing what's happening. And President Trump's personal relationship with people like Netanyahu, Erdogan in Turkey, the leadership in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and all these other countries is so key to this. You could see when they did the photo op yesterday after the signing, there were very warm relationships between all these people and President Trump, including most of the European leaders were there in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, gathering together in support of this plan. So it's almost like the birth of a baby. The whole world is coming around, with few exceptions, to say we're going to support this effort. So I am cautiously optimistic that this is a great step forward for the Middle East. The people of the Middle East deserve to have prosperity and peace like we in the West enjoy.
And just to see the joy and the celebrations among Israelis, it's really encouraging here. And Ambassador, I just want to follow up on a point you mentioned earlier about the footage that we showed of violence that Hamas is engaging in. Can we get your comments on what do you think the obstacles still remain in achieving permanent peace? Because this is the initial phase. Right? Because we've seen reports that Hamas is engaging in executions of those that it claims has cooperated with Israel. So maybe you can talk to us about that, the obstacles here.
Well, the obstacles are great because we know that it's not just Hamas that went on October 7th and attacked the people of Israel and killed and raped, burned people alive. It was also Gazans and people involved with the UN, with UNRWA. And so I think that the biggest issue is going to be the de-radicalization. Part of it is the education that the children get. Golda Meir once said, "We'll have peace with Gaza in the Middle East when the people of Palestine love their children more than they use." And I think that the idea that they're going to live side by side is going to mean that they're going to have to change their mindset and their education. The people that hate Israel are probably not going to be able to stay because they will not tolerate, this coalition will not tolerate attacks on Israelis and hateful acts. The suicide bombers, that has to end. Using the aid to build tunnels to attack Israel has to end. Now, there are certain concepts in Islam for these jihadi types that say, you can fake peace for 10 or 15 years, and then you go back at it and you go back to jihad, which is what they've been doing against Israel. They want to end, every Jewish life in that region. These people, not the general Arab community, but I'm talking about the Gazans in many cases. And so they're going to have to really watch this, and it's going to be necessary to keep watchful hands on this situation for the decades to come. I mean, past my lifetime, they'll have to really help and nurture this new. It's going to be a new society with infrastructure and a good life for these people, but they're going to have to behave themselves. So the carrots and sticks that President Trump uses, where he requires performance for every reward, so that there are hurdles that the Palestinian people will have to jump through, that's going to be important to keep that in place.
So there's a carrot and stick approach, this peace through strength approach. How does Trump's approach, how is it different from previous administrations in terms of international relations and peace?
Sure. Most previous administrations went to concessions right away. And instead of being strong in the negotiation, which is certainly necessary in the Middle East, that's a very tough place to negotiate. Instead of leading from strength, they started with concessions. And so the opponents, whoever that country was or group, saw weakness and took every advantage. Well, President Trump, just like in trade, says, no, we're not here to be abused. We're here to be the superpower of the world, benign, good, but you don't mess with us. And because he has that strong America First leadership, leading with peace through strength, then the other countries and other organizations, groups like the Palestinians, they are responding with, I'm sure, pressure from Qatar, from Turkey, so there's been outside pressure on them as well. Otherwise, I don't believe they would have come to the table at all.
Okay, Ambassador, let me just ask you one more question. And this is relating to President Trump's legacy. If we're looking back from the future at this moment, how do you think President Trump's legacy in terms of the global stage will be remembered?
Well, thank you for that question. It's such a leading question. I think that he goes down in history as the greatest president in the history of our country. He's being compared in the Middle East to Cyrus the Great. And so we can, how long ago was that? Hundreds of years ago. So, and one of the greatest leaders in the world. So you can see he's coming from a position of strength. He is upending the diplomatic and global norms. And he's saying that we're going to hold everyone accountable for their actions, accountable for how they treat others and treat us, and that there'll be hurdles, and that for every good thing that comes to these folks, they're going to have to perform. It's not going to be automatic. And so that's really encouraging. And it's also going to encourage more good behavior from other countries. They're going to want to benefit from trade, from aid, from powerful and rich countries like this coalition that President Trump's put together. Those countries that gathered there in Sharm el-Sheikh yesterday, I think that it's most of the global GDP was in the room. So, he really does have a coalition of the great. And who doesn't want to be part of that? Everyone.
Well, okay, Ambassador, really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Enforcement. A spokesperson for Facebook parent company Meta confirmed the move, saying the page violated its policies. Doxing involves posting personal information about an individual for the purpose of harassment or intimidation. Such information includes names, photographs, addresses, phone numbers, and other identifying information. Apple earlier this month removed apps that allowed users to track the movement of ICE agents, following pressure from the Trump administration. Google has also made similar apps unavailable. Homeland Security personnel have arrested more than 1,500 illegal immigrants in Illinois. The department said pedophiles, gang members, and armed robbers were among those arrested. DHS posted on X, quote, Operation Midway Blitz is making Illinois safe again. Launched last month, the department says the operation is targeting criminal illegal immigrants in Illinois. DHS cited what it called sanctuary policies under Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Jurisdictions following sanctuary policies prohibit local officials from enforcing immigration laws and complying with federal authorities. Trump has deployed the National Guard to Illinois, but is facing legal challenges. An appeals court ruled that the administration can federalize National Guard troops in Illinois. However, the court also ruled that Trump cannot deploy them in Chicago while the appeals process continues. And President Trump welcoming Argentinian President Milei at the White House and endorsing him for re-election, and the president issuing a new warning to Hamas. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu at the White House. Mari, good afternoon. So talk to us here. What is the latest from President Trump's meeting with Milei?
Don, good afternoon. It was a very warm exchange between President Milei of Argentina and our president today in the cabinet room here at the White House. President Trump is saying that he fully endorses President Milei for re-election, and in return, President Milei is praising President Trump for the Gaza ceasefire plan, and he also is nominating President Trump with a gold-framed letter for the Nobel Peace Prize. This meeting is coming as the United States just last week finalized a $20 billion economic rescue plan to support Milei's reform agenda and to stabilize the Argentinian peso. This is before Argentina's midterm elections happen on October 26th. The president says that this rescue package is about, quote, helping our neighbors. Take a look.
Helping a great philosophy take over a great country. Argentina is one of the most beautiful countries that I've ever seen. And we want to see it succeed. It's very simple. If Argentina does well, you're going to have others following, and a lot of others are following.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio also adds that Argentina is foremost among several Latin American countries that have, quote, aligned with the United States on issue after issue. And Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that Milei is fighting, quote, 100 years of bad economic history and policy, and that the U.S. will not ignore its allies. Meanwhile, in the same meeting, President Trump now has this warning for Hamas. Take a look.
And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes.
Because everyone says, oh, well, they won't disarm. They will disarm. And I spoke to Hamas, and I said, you're going to disarm, right? Yes, sir, we're going to disarm. That's what they told me. They will disarm, or we will disarm them.
President Trump also says that he wants back all of the deceased hostages that are being held in Gaza, and that he believes that the disarming of Hamas will happen in a, quote, reasonable period of time. Don, back to you.
All right, Mari, thank you. What is President Trump's overall approach to peace on the world stage? How does it differ from previous administrations? We discuss this after the break. Britain expects to see the full plans before approval of a huge proposed Chinese embassy in London after China previously supplied blueprints with areas blacked out. Critics in both the UK and the US have repeatedly warned the site could be used as a Chinese spy base. We have that and more after this break. A historic peace deal in the Middle East has been brokered by President Trump and his administration. Joining us to discuss is Taylor Hathorn, visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum Center for American Safety and Security. So good afternoon to you, Taylor. Can we start with your comments? Good to see you, Taylor. How would you characterize the president's overall approach to peace on the world stage?
The president has been very consistent in his approach to world peace throughout or on the world stage. And it really is this mindset of peace through strength. And I believe that he definitely showed that over the last 48 hours.
And what would you say sets Trump's approach apart from previous administrations?
Trump is a realist. He knows what it's going to take to get the deal done. As one of your previous guests stated, he wrote the book, The Art of the Deal, and he really applies this principle in all that he does in foreign policy. I think it's really important to note that something that this administration is doing very well, that other administrations in the past kind of have fallen short at, is that they are using real world practical approaches to policy solutions, and you're seeing that play out very effectively.
And how's the current administration impacting America's legacy? How is it perceived on the global stage?
You and I have talked about this before. I grew up in the Middle East. I grew up overseas, and I was there during the President Obama's years. And it was a little difficult taking foreign policy classes and international relations classes at that time, because it really felt like America had no real direction, no way forward in the leadership that we were having on the global stage. And I really feel like President Trump is coming back to the table. He's bringing everyone together and saying, the United States is in the driver's seat, and we are leading these initiatives, but we want the entire world, especially in the Middle East, having leadership and representatives from the Middle East involved in the Gazan peace deal in the process, is to make sure that they have a role and that they are involved in this process, which is incredibly important in making sure that that peace is sustained.
How would you say authoritarian regimes have reacted to Trump's peace through strength approach so far?
I remember during the first Trump administration when he went over to visit with the North Korean leadership, and everyone was just, dismayed that he would make such a decision. They really thought that we were going to go into World War III, that it was going to be the end. But I think Trump has really shown that he knows how to handle people like this. He knows how to work with them. He knows how to deal with them, because he is not a dictator. He is someone who listens to the needs and the wants of the other side. It is not just foot stomping what the United States wants. It is really leading peace through strength and showing people what can be possible if we work together as a greater world.
So peace through strength, and America first, right? That's Trump's policy, and it doesn't mean America alone. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. I think that a lot of people who are anti-President Trump and anti this admin are saying, well, they're isolating us. We're becoming isolationists. And I don't think that that could be further from the truth. Just look at the way that we're working with NATO, how our NATO allies are starting to spend more money to make sure that our collective protections are being held up, that we are supporting each other, that we are working with our allies. The president has had, I believe, over $17 trillion worth of investment in the United States in 8 months alone, compared to the $1 trillion of investment during the Biden administration. So I definitely think it shows that America is on the path to working with other countries, to rebuilding our legacy, to rebuilding our footing in the global stage. And we're not becoming isolationists. You would not see that investment otherwise. You would not see NATO nations coming to the table this way. And you would not see and hear the praise that President Trump is getting from world leaders around the world right now.
So Taylor, looking back, we can see the relationships perhaps changing or evolving in front of our eyes. Can you speak to in what ways has he reshaped alliances or international relationships?
I don't think years ago any of us would have ever imagined, President Trump receiving praise about Machado getting a Nobel Peace Prize and him getting that prize dedicated to him, or a figure of him being put on a beach in Israel. I don't think we would have seen this stuff or imagine we would have seen this. So I really think that he is coming forward with a very different approach this administration, where he's listening. He's hired the right people. Secretary Rubio, as President Trump mentioned in his speech to the Knesset, he is going to go down as the greatest Secretary of State in history. And I completely agree with that, because of the way that this administration is leading. They are focusing on relationships. They don't want the United States to do it alone, but they are very clear that we can if we have to. That is just not our preference.
Do you think his approach, President Trump's approach, could serve as a potential model for future administrations?
I think it has to. I think anyone who is looking at this, left, right, or center, I think you've got to look at this environment and say, this is working, and what we have done before was not working. And President Trump himself cannot be the only factor that makes that successful. We have to look at what is happening and analyze it and really see what we're going to move forward with as a country in the years to come, whether the next administration is a Vance administration or whomever might be at that seat. We really have to look at the successes here and say that this is not just an anomaly solely because President Trump is in that seat. As great as he is, and as good of a job as he's doing, we've got to be able to replicate that. And I think that this old world view of all of these Harvard and Georgetown foreign policy institutions where we do everything by a book and a certain prescription is clearly not working. And it hasn't worked since probably the Reagan administration, because even Ronald Reagan handled things very differently than we have the last 30, 40 years. So I think we really have to be able to look at that and replicate what we want to moving forward.
Okay, Taylor, just one final question. Do you think Trump's leadership has reinforced and solidified America's position as a global leader?
I do. I think his speech at the United Nations really brought home that the United Nations and the member states really need to step up what the United Nations needs to do and the role that they need to play. I mean, President Trump has now solved 9 conflicts in an 8-month or 9-month presidency, whereas these conflicts had been going on for decades. And he came in and said, this is inefficient, this is ineffective, we don't need to do this anymore. But he really called on the United Nations to step up. The United States spends roughly $13 billion a year of our taxpayer dollars funding the United Nations. And you really have to wonder what their effectiveness and their efficiency has been. And I think Trump has definitely brought that to attention and asked or caused people to ask themselves the role that they play in the United Nations, the role that the United Nations is going to play on a global scale, and the role that Trump and the United States of America are going to play in that organization as well.
Okay, well, Taylor, well said. It's good to see you again. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
The Senate will vote yet again on proposals to reopen the government. Republicans warned that the Democrats' refusal to compromise could actually make this the longest shutdown in history, potentially. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, has the latest from Capitol Hill.
It seems like Groundhog Day on Capitol Hill. The Senate will vote for an 8th time on proposals to reopen government. The Republican House-passed bill simply seeks to extend current levels of government funding, while the Democratic proposal would add $1.5 trillion of government spending to extend COVID-era healthcare tax credits.
We did not load up the temporary funding bill with any Republican priorities or partisan priorities at all. I don't have anything that I can take off of that document to make it more palatable.
Around 4,000 federal employees will be terminated by reductions in force. Democratic senators from Maryland and Virginia, where thousands of federal employees live, maintain that their healthcare policy demands must be met for the government to reopen.
And we know that when we support our federal employees, we are supporting every American.
We can do both. Let's get the government reopened. Let's stop this healthcare crisis cliff and make sure these federal workers get back pay.
The White House will use research and development funds from the Department of War to pay active duty military personnel. And it will use also tariff revenue to keep the Women, Infant, and Children Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program afloat during the shutdown.
We are grateful that the White House has made available last week indicates that it may be about $300 million. And if that's correct, we think that's about 2 weeks of benefits on average if it's equally distributed across states.
Air traffic controllers and thousands of essential federal employees will miss their first paycheck this week.
I have to pay my mortgage payment. I need to provide for my family. I think any time that you have to go without a paycheck, there's a certain level of stress that comes with that.
And this introduces a new risk to aviation. Air traffic controllers are supposed to mitigate risk. Air traffic controllers ensure that risk is out of the system so that those who fly and those who we serve, that they are safe. And this brings a risk where their focus is now on, when I get off my shift today, do I have to go and drive Uber tonight?
The longer the shutdown continues, the fewer options the White House will have to keep essential personnel paid and important welfare programs like WIC afloat during the government shutdown. Republicans are bracing for what could become the longest ever government shutdown in U.S. history. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
While some critical economic data is delayed due to the ongoing government shutdown, today Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell provided some insights on the economic outlook at the NABE meeting.
Based on the data we do have, it's fair to say that the outlook for employment and inflation does not appear to have changed much since our September meeting 4 weeks ago. There is no risk-free path for policy as we navigate the tension between our employment and inflation goals.
Powell said the Fed is still able to review public and private data. He started by describing the labor market as softer and less dynamic. Powell said unemployment has remained low, but payrolls have gained and have slowed sharply. He said that household and firm perceptions of job availability and hiring difficulties continue on downward trajectories. As for inflation, Powell said the 12-month core PCE inflation in August was up slightly from earlier this year at 2.9%. Powell noted price increases on goods primarily reflect tariffs rather than broader inflationary pressures. And now we're joined by Nathan Worcester, national political reporter for the Epoch Times, and he is joining us from Washington, D.C., where he's been covering the government shutdown from his vantage point on Capitol Hill. So, Nathan, we're now 2 weeks into the lapse of federal funding, and Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, has suggested the standoff could become one of the longest in history. I mean, are there signs at all that anyone is budging?
Well, the short answer is no. It really seems as though we're at a point where, in the words of Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, there has been radio silence from Republicans after that meeting just ahead of the shutdown at the White House. And on the other hand, you have Republicans saying that Democrats simply won't negotiate in what they consider to be good faith. They really just want to get what they call a clean, continuing resolution across the line, whereas Democrats are hoping to negotiate something over these expiring ACA or Obamacare premium insurance subsidies.
So, Nathan, what are the big dividing lines currently between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to the funding bill?
Well, I mentioned them just a moment ago, the ACA subsidies. And Speaker Johnson will say that the expiration really only becomes an issue at the end of the year. He has stressed, including today at a press conference with other Republican leaders, that there can be negotiations. In fact, there are solutions, he says, that can be arrived at, but that will have to come after the shutdown ends. So you have Republicans still with a pretty unified message on this front. There's some deviations, notably Marjorie Taylor Greene has voiced concern about the expiring premiums. On the other hand, you have Democrats who believe that as soon as November 1st, when some notices begin to come out, and indeed some people may already be receiving notices, many Americans will face much higher premiums, may face issues with healthcare that they didn't before, and so they feel that this issue has to be forced. It should be noted, in fairness to the Republicans, that the alternative Democratic measure wouldn't just target ACA subsidies, it would also target other elements of healthcare spending that were cut through the One Big Beautiful Bill earlier this year, with a total price tag of $1.5 trillion.
So why has Speaker Johnson kept the House out of session then?
This is something that the press has given him some grief about, asked, well, while you're saying that we need to be getting these things done, like appropriations and other measures through regular order, why are you keeping the House out of session? And I think really it comes down to the fact that this is a negotiating tactic. This is a means of applying pressure. And the government is shut down, so that might well limit what can be done. It's interesting, Johnson has said that there were, and perhaps still are, negotiations, maybe informal talks that have been going on certainly before the shutdown across the aisle between Democrats and Republicans over some of these vexed issues over healthcare spending. But again, at the moment, it seems as though, despite the fact that there are some lawmakers on the Republican and Democratic side who may be engaged in some informal conversations, there's not a great deal of talking going on. I think right now we're looking at a pretty strong, still standoff.
Right, and as you know, the Trump administration has taken steps to pay the military during this government shutdown. What specifically did they do, and has anyone challenged it?
So they have, according to reporting, moved about $8 billion that would have been used for research and development, but that was unobligated. And of course, they maintain that this is something that's within their power to do. Indeed, on some related rescissions issues, the Supreme Court recently ruled in favor of the administration. But at the same time, you have Democrats, as well as the Cato Institute, challenging the legality of such a move, arguing that it might actually encroach on the Congress's constitutional authority, their power of the purse. And I personally had a chance to ask Speaker Johnson about those objections earlier today. He told me that not only is it something that should be in the president's authority, but if Democrats want to raise a legal challenge, want to raise an issue over military service members being paid, they can bring it. I think the perception there is that it would be a losing issue. For me, what is interesting is if other federal law enforcement, such as, for example, Immigration and Customs Enforcement or ICE, if their paychecks end up being drawn out of some of these unobligated funds, that might be an easier issue for the Democrats politically. So could we perhaps see some challenges over that? Time will tell.
So Speaker Johnson brought up a Nobel Peace Prize nomination for President Trump during today's press conference. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, this was an announcement at the start of the press conference. He and the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset are apparently going to be embarking on an effort rallying parliaments and other political leaders across the planet to try to convince them that based upon the phase one of this Israeli-Hamas deal, we've seen the release of hostages, not all of them, or not all of even the bodies of deceased hostages, but large-scale hostage release. And of course, this comes alongside other things that Trump has done over the past few months. As your previous guest pointed out, negotiating or being heavily involved in many deals to end or at least de-escalate conflicts around the planet. This has set the stage for a lot of people now to be asking why he is not a contender at this point to be a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Although I have to say, some people, at least looking at the responses to some of my own social media tweets about this, would raise the question, is this even an award that people should be seeking anymore? Is it something that has lost some of its luster?
So you said earlier there's no signs that perhaps either side could be budging. Should I just not hope at all that today's Senate vote could go any differently?
Well, you know, what's the old expression that things happen very slowly until they happen very quickly? I think that it could well be the case that there are, if not enough votes to swing it, those 5 necessary votes to overcome a potential filibuster and hit 60, but maybe 1 or 2 other Democrats swinging. Perhaps the thing to look out for here would be something that we've seen previously on the Senate floor. Mike Rounds of South Dakota and other lawmakers were having some sort of a meeting on the floor. This was earlier in the shutdown. Perhaps we'll see something that looks like negotiations of that sort taking place, but yes, I wouldn't necessarily be expecting the government to reopen after today. Although, as Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma posted, this could all be over in 5 minutes. We could actually see the passage of this CR. Though, if I were to bet on this, I would not bet on it happening tonight. I'll put it that way.
Okay, so Nathan, final question. And you said that Republicans need 5 votes. Are there any lawmakers worth watching in the days and perhaps weeks ahead?
Yes, so there are a few who have been of interest, I would say, multiple lawmakers who may be up for re-election in 2026. You know, for various reasons, they might want to be cognizant of the fact that if this shutdown goes on long enough, it could start to look bad for them. And then we have lawmakers who are retiring or who are otherwise known for a somewhat more moderate stance. I mentioned Mike Rounds, for example, the Republican from South Dakota, who has been involved in at least some negotiations, has spoken to reporters. You also have Jeanne Shaheen. She's a Democrat from New Hampshire who has said some interesting things, has spoken about the need, for example, in her view, to negotiate something ahead of that November 1st deadline. I suppose the question is whether she could be persuaded to change her vote while getting some guarantees of negotiations between the end of the shutdown, if the shutdown ends before November 1st, and that date. But again, I think there's a good reason to be pessimistic that we're going to see a resolution today.
Well, okay, despite that, it's still good to talk to you today. Nathan, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Don.
Ukraine is reportedly revoking the citizenship of the mayor of Odessa, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to meet with President Trump in Washington on Friday. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has the Ukraine update.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reportedly revoked the citizenship of Odessa Mayor Hennady Trukhanov. That's according to a source familiar with the matter. Zelensky says that the Russian citizenship of certain individuals has been confirmed. Relevant decisions have been prepared regarding them. The decree has been signed, but he didn't publish any names. Trukhanov has previously denied holding Russian citizenship. The allegation has caused problems throughout his political career. Ukraine prohibits its citizens from also holding Russian citizenship. And the Kremlin says it welcomes President Trump's desire to focus on the search for a peace deal to end the fighting in Ukraine.
We certainly welcome such intentions, and we welcome the confirmation of the political will to do everything possible to promote the search for peaceful solutions.
This comes as Zelensky is set to meet with Trump in Washington on Friday. Zelensky is expected to ask for Tomahawk missiles. The request comes as European military aid for Kiev dropped. Zelensky is asking foreign countries to provide more air defense systems. He says Russia strikes power plants, power lines, and natural gas facilities. The strikes are believed to be part of a campaign to disable Ukraine's power supply. This denies civilians heat and running water during the bitter winter. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
The high seas is now a key front in the trade war between the world's two largest economies. The U.S. and China began charging additional port fees on ocean shipping firms today. Here are the details.
The US and China are charging additional tit-for-tat port fees on ocean shipping firms in the latest escalation of their trade war. These charges will affect vessels transporting everything from toys to crude oil. China has already begun collecting the fees from ships that are US-owned, operated, built, or flagged. However, Chinese-built vessels are exempt. According to state media, exemptions also apply to empty ships entering Chinese shipyards for repairs. Meanwhile, the US will begin collecting its fees on Tuesday. Earlier this year, the Trump administration set out a plan to target China-linked ships in a bid to weaken Beijing's dominance of global shipping and boost American shipbuilding. A prior investigation under former President Joe Biden found that China uses unfair practices to control the maritime, logistics, and shipbuilding sectors, clearing the way for the new penalties. One analyst said Chinese state-owned shipping giant COSCO could be hit hardest, potentially absorbing nearly half of the estimated $3.2 billion in fees by 2026. Despite the turmoil, shares in COSCO rose around 3% in early trading on Tuesday. The company announced a plan to buy back shares worth around $210 million to protect its value and reassure investors.
Home kitchens in Washington state have become volunteer bakeries churning out loaves of bread. They're part of a project called Community Loaves, which works to provide food for people in need. NTD's Andrew Thomas has more on their mission.
Home baker Cheryl Ewaldson has baked nearly 800 loaves of bread in just 2 years, not because she loves carbs, but to help her neighbors. Her oven creations become donations.
I liked Community Loaves because it's the opportunity for me to bake something and to share something with others in the community where they don't necessarily need to know who I am, but they know that there's a community that loves and cares for them.
Former culinary school dean Catherine Curley is the founder of Community Loaves. She started the organization in Seattle when the pandemic hit in 2020.
I was home, displaced from my own work, and loved to bake. And just an idea sparked, would it be possible for us to help from our home get important, valuable nutrition to our food banks?
Since then, the initiative has grown into a network of nearly 900 volunteer bakers. They're spread out across Washington, Oregon, California, and Idaho. According to Curley, Community Loaves has already donated more than 220,000 loaves since its founding.
It makes us feel like we're becoming a bit of a supplier to that emergency food system, and it's all on volunteer power.
Community Loaves expects to keep baking, filling bread baskets for families in need. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
A 2,300-pound pumpkin took top prize at the 52nd World Championship Pumpkin Weight-Off in Northern California yesterday.
I'm not a professional farmer. I work at Rivian as an engineer in manufacturing engineering, so I work on electric vehicles as my day job and grow pumpkins as a hobby. I was in this position last year, but I lost by 6 pounds. This year was able to take the win, and that's really what the goal was this year, was to win one of the best, if not the best, pumpkin weigh-offs in the world.
That pumpkin is massive, and it comes at a similar weight to a smaller sedan or a large bison, just for perspective for you guys. Dawson says he has been growing giant pumpkins for 5 years. He's saying that precision skills required at his job helped him with the right watering and sunlight for his pumpkin to grow. The pumpkin champ also claimed the $20,000 prize for growing his champion gourd. President Trump will soon participate in a ceremony at the White House to honor the late Charlie Kirk with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Stay with us.